Perfect sense.
Mm-hmm. Right now, the distorted psychic abilities, as we start weighing that in, because psychics are highly sensitive, yeah, right? So that's coming in over top of that. It's even more circuits are open, right? You know, that fear label, like I've had clients whose parents have done exorcisms on them, like, you know, taken them to psychiatrists, all because they were getting premonitions. When I was working in the, you know, with the social workers, there was a little girl that the entire organization was disrupted by. And, you know, it was a Christian organization. And this little girl, right, could glimpse about 15 minutes into the future, right? So she could glimpse change about 15 minutes into the future, which was very beneficial for her in her home life, right? Because she could bypass a lot of situations, right? Because she was tracking heat, right? So, you know, a child that has grown up in a fearful situation and they're an empath and psychic, they're going to start tracking heat. And that is their barometer for, oh, something's coming, right? Something's coming, I need to run. So this little girl could do that. And in her, when she was in the foster home, right, she was constantly giving, you know, hey, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And they were freaked out and were thinking she was possessed or something, right? And, you know, I sat with their team and I'm like, is she wrong? Is she ever wrong? They're like, no, she's always right. And I'm like, okay, so if she can look at you and say the mailman's coming through the gate and he's coming through the gate, why is that a problem for you? Right? She's smarter than you are. She knows more than you are. She's gaining more information than you are, right? Let's congratulate her for that. If you dismantle that, she is going to be in danger in her home. If she starts being shamed and that starts becoming a negative thing that she can glimpse into the future, that means when she goes home, she's going to still be standing there when dad comes in punching. Mm-hmm. See what I'm saying? Because that has been saving her when she goes home. Yeah.
Yeah, you're really I'm really connecting with this material.
Yeah. Because it's legit, right? Now, I've also worked with people that, you know, like this one woman, she was like, you know, started being able to see fairies and she was scared to death. She knew the fairies were going to like create great harm. And her work was always centered around, right, saving bad souls, right? And finally I said to her, I said, honey, you aren't God. You're not God. You have no right, nor are you in integrity enough to define whether these souls are good or bad or not. If you're charged to save the souls, your judgment is negating anything you're doing. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Right? Because she was always like, everything had that air, right? Where she was feeling constantly under attack, right? She wouldn't sleep. Things were always coming in to get her. Yeah, always attacking her. And what's real and true is she was really aggressive with a lot of people.
She's really what?
she was aggressive, like, and judgmental and blaming with a lot of people, right? So this fear would isolate her on every level of her existence. And I'd be like, I said, why do you think you are targeted, right? Why do you think you are the target for all these aliens? She said, well, because they want my power. And I said, well, if you have that much power, why don't you make them go away? Right? So there was this imbalance in that, to where she had this kind of God complex and was afraid of everything, which didn't match up. So that was our journey. Does that make sense?
Oh, it's a huge subject. It's a huge subject. I appreciate how perceptive you were in that situation, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was like, there was such discrepancy there that she could not be trusted. And she was very gifted, but not trustworthy, because her perceptions were so fear-based, and the words that she would use were so fear-based that any advice she gave would be catastrophic advice,
Yeah.
right? It would be advice that, rather than, I'm working with a beautiful psychic right now, right? And, I've got numerous in my clientele. And it's like, okay, you're dead on always. And that information could be delivered in a way that was empowering rather than scary. Right? If I'm going to see something in somebody's future, I'm going to work to guide them around it rather than point them right at it, because where attention goes, grows. Right? So if I'm going to tell them this catastrophe comes and there is out there as a possibility, and they start worrying about it, that's going to happen. Right? But the fact that it's a possibility means there are other possibilities as well. Let's look at them. Let's see how we can get you around that explosion. Right? I was speaking with a woman the other day who's, been rising out of childhood sexual trauma with dad and her family. And we've been working really hard to keep the family intact in spite of dad. Right? And, where was I going? I don't know where I was going. What was I saying right at the beginning? I lost my track.
Just that you were speaking to a woman and oh,
Yeah. Her feelings, right? Oh, and delivering that information. I saw a potential, right? That dad was going to show up for Christmas. That he was going to come knocking on the door, right? So I didn't say, right, oh my God, dad's coming to your house, like, while everybody's there, but it's like, okay, right? And seeing a possibility where there could be interaction with dad. So in our awareness, I want us to prepare, right, for that not to be the possibility that's chosen, right? And I want us to prepare for that interaction so that you're not sideways, right? And that presentation, right? Fear did not enter her face, right? Because my advice and strategy was guiding her around that situation rather than pointing her at it. And that's something that we really must be aware of. Right? And a lot of our people feel this. They know they were here for better things and greater things. They know that they came here to do something. They know that in other lifetimes they have been leaders. They know that. often many will say that to me. And it's like, all right, well, you're not here by accident. And, you know, I don't believe your circumstances up to today was by accident. You chose that so that you would know and you could take your place and you would stay awake. Right? I had a healer probably 20 years ago say that to me, and I thought I wanted to scratch her eyeballs out. But what's real and true is that I did stay awake. And I did grow my gifts during that time. And so did these people. Now, I'm not just going to say that to them, but that's something that I'm aware of as I'm working with them, is that everything that builds in today is filtering into why they are here and why they chose to be here. Because an empath chose to be here. It is the highest level of
I remember I remember making the choice. So
yeah, me too. I had 9 windows. I've had 9 near-death experiences where I could have left. And I kept coming back. And I would be so angry in my 3D self that I would come back, but I would. So now it's important for us to have some awareness around what is possible for them, right? Apparition, you know, objects moving. I've experienced that. That can be crazy train, right? And I have clients who have experienced that, right? Being able to manifest physical objects or send them, right? So there's a cool story about this group of nuns. I think it was like in the 1400s. And this one young woman had, you know, was dropped at the nunnery as an infant and, you know, did nothing but pray and meditate, right? And she was able to bring like Bibles and rosaries and blah, blah, blah to the United States, to the Native Americans, so that when the Spaniards came, many of them had some of those objects already. Now, it became clear that that was happening, and, you know, the Pope or the higher ups of the church sequestered this group of nuns and banned them from meditating. And they claimed all these nun sightings as Mary sightings.
As what?
Mary sightings.
Right? Oh yeah.
So, you know, Mary of Guadalupe and all this. It's, you know, these nuns were doing that, right? They were showing up at times of need, right? Because we track heat, right? So if you're showing up and there's need, that is a situation that would pull you. That's what we're tracking through time, right? Is that heat. Does that make sense? Right? So as those nuns are meditating, I know when I'm meditating, like I'll pop in on catastrophes, site-wise, not like where I'm taking them things. I don't have that strong of a nut, you know, I'm not that good, but you know, they could, which is super cool, right? So now astral projection, these people know how to do that. They don't know they know how to do that, but they know how to do that, right? And they've had very scary, probably, experiences early on, right? That has created a lot of fear around it. You know, I've had clients that can remember seeing their body laying there, right? That tried to open the door, couldn't open it, right? You know, different things like that where, you know, they kind of got scared of it because they didn't know what it was, right? It is a superpower to be able to consciously leave your body. You know, I mean, our government has been studying these abilities since the 80s. our spies are trained with this. They can get more information projecting in than they can get on the ground, right? Because we're looking at things from an overview, right? Dissociation, again, is the first step for being able to astral project or quantum jump or anything, is the separation of your astral body from your physical body, right? Energy medicine, we know people have the ability to heal with their hands, right? We have chakras in our hands. One thing I do with my people is have them start recognizing that energy, start understanding that they have the power to do that, right? Levitation, that's real. I've seen Chopra do it. I have seen Deepak Chopra levitate. I haven't had the patience to do it. Like, I have been able to get like half of my body up and kind of bounce, but I've never been able to like float. He can, right? So that's real. It can happen. Materialization is the creation or appearance of matter. I've witnessed that. I've not done it, right? But I have witnessed, right? And usually in a space of fear, right? The materialization of a lost object or something, right? I've witnessed that. Post-cognition, the ability to perceive past events, right? I'm a master. So as you move in, you'll become a master, you know, the ability to travel to those events and work with them, right? Telepathy is the ability to transmit or receive thoughts supernaturally, right? A telepathic person is can also be very manipulative, right? Depending on if they're a really good receiver or a really good transmitter, right? Because a telepathic person could transmit thoughts without you knowing they're not yours. So that also becomes a place with our people that we're starting to define, right? What they're reading, and separate that out from what is their information, right? What part of this information is for you? And obviously you are a healer, right? If you're reading other people's information, right? So, you know, you can imagine me young sitting with people and having these flashes of things that happened to them and not knowing what to do with that. And a person that is unconscious is often looking out of the eyes, right, of the other person. So that means you really don't know if it's you or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, you know, when I was young, like if I was sitting with you and I started seeing these hits, right, and I'm looking out of your eyes, I'm not knowing that it's not me that's happening to, or did happen to, or is going to happen to. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, it's deeply confusing.
Yeah, so that distinction is something we're starting to create, right? And, you know, one of the biggest, most simple ways to maneuver that is if you are very clear of what you're feeling like and you get a hit, the first question is this mine? Right? And then you're using your computer. Is this mine? Yes or no? Right? No? Okay. Well, am I meant to do something with it? Am I meant to affect in some way? Yes or no? Right? Those questions, right? If it's like, yes, this is yours, then okay. What do I need to know right now that I'm missing? Yeah. Right? And that starts creating those distinctions and puts you in authority of it, right? And starts creating that mirror versus the absorption. right? Because the absorption starts in our heads, where we start creating a story about that being ours. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes people, is that a difference between intrusive thoughts?
Yeah. No, it's the same thing, right? But they're not really intrusive because you're doing it. Oftentimes that's a shift, right? The empath feels so persecuted and they're the ones doing it. It's like, well, like, you know, there's times we're eavesdropping on situations and it's none of our business, truly, right? There's times where we're scanning for, you know, or we're receiving information and it's not ours. We're not meant to affect it, and we're deciding it's ours, right? So
Yeah.
instead going, no, thank you. No, thank you. That's not mine. I don't have anything to do with that, right? And in that awareness, the intrusive thoughts start waning.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if this is okay, just keep on going.
Often people will say to me, oh, I'm channeling. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're just fucking thinking. You're just thinking right now. That's different than channeling. Channeling is usually information that comes through spontaneously and has very little reflection on yourself, and there's no emotion around it, right? It's like you're nothing but a telephone, right? So when I start channeling, it's just like me as a person almost becomes unconscious, and like they're using my body and my mouth to talk, and I'll come back out on the other end and not even know what I said, right?
But it's not something that you practice a whole lot, eh, Cherie? It's like it's not the focus. It's not really the focus of what you're up to in the world.
No, but I do it, right? And you know, I utilize that channel, right? Now, I don't believe I'm channeling people. I believe I'm like, I've got an open channel to that, which is different. Does that make sense?
Not really. I don't get it.
Okay, right? If your modem is messed up, your internet gets messed up. That doesn't mean that there's no internet, yeah? So in myself, I am opening myself as a channel to the universal internet, not to a being necessarily. Like, Jesus is around all the time. He talks to me all the time, but he never talks through me.
He never talks through you? Hello?
Yeah, no, I'm saying he never talks through me, right?
Yeah.
He'll talk
Okay.
to me, but he never talks through me. When I'm channeling, I don't feel like I am channeling a being. I am opening a channel to information, right? It's like that Kundalini is plugged right into the universal internet, and, you know, scanning for what is necessary for that moment. There are times things come through me that I'm like, I don't know how right?
Well, I had an experience. I don't know what you would call it. I had an experience that I had a friend who had a baby boy, and he was born with his brainstem almost like he was deeply damaged in his brain, but he was still alive. But he couldn't do anything, and they had to feed him by a hole in his stomach, I believe, you know.
Yeah, I can see him.
But he could breathe, you know, he could breathe, and but he couldn't, he would never be able to develop or whatever, right? And she left him in the hospital. Bonnie left him in the hospital. She could not deal with it, right? So what happened was when I was praying, this baby would come to me and he would communicate with me. So I ended up picking up the phone and saying, Bonnie, or I don't know whether I messengered her or whatever, but I asked her if we could have a conversation about what I was experiencing. And I very humbly, you know, told her that I felt
That's real, right?
that this
That's real.
baby was communicating with me, and that, you know, that he really loved her, and that, you know, that he loved his family and he wanted to come home. And she was of a fundamentalist Christian orientation. And she said, you know something? She said, I actually believe you because he's still alive. If you were trying to tell me this when he had passed away, I would not believe you, because in our church, we don't believe that stuff. But because he's still alive, I believe you. And she did. She brought him home.
Well, I want to honor you in that. Right? That's mediumship.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I have had communications from people who've been on the other side. And I pleaded with God to stop it because it was too much for me.
Well, here's how I dealt with that. I was told years ago that you can set up parameters, right? So if I'm working with someone and a family member or an ancestor or something comes in with information that is necessary or pertinent, right? I will be willing to listen. But
Oh,
I
yeah.
do not want to be in my living room with dead people sitting around. And I was living like that for a second. And I, you know, or being in the grocery store where I'm being tapped on the shoulder to give a message. People don't want to hear it, right? So again, there's that space of, you know, being able to go, all right, you know, if I feel I can trust you and you're trustworthy and you want to be of a benefit to a person, right? But I'm going to probably ask the questions first, and I don't like make a deal out of it, right? I don't be like, oh, I'm going to go into channeling, right? You know, if I'm hearing these messages come through, I may say, you know what, your mom's here. Do you want to engage with her? Do you want to hear what she has to say? Yes or no? If they don't, then I'll be like, move on.
Yeah.
Like, they're not interested.
No, this is really great. Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, you know, I don't mess with it, you know. Now, I have been witnessing as I had people come to Missouri and we set that container, right? I do have a team of amazing folks that show up. There's a shaman. I have a Native American drum. There's a Native American that comes with that drum every time, right? And, you know, there's a team that is coming around. Now, are they holding a container? Yes. Are they interfering? No, they don't. They're just adding to the container. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not that they're not helpful in my receiving information. I'm not saying that. But they're not talking through me. They're not taking over my body. They're not like, they're just helping me hold that container, right? Does that make sense too?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So the psychometry or the psychopic, how do you say that? So
Psychometry, psychoscopy.
psychoscopy. right, is the ability to gain information through trust, through touch. I don't know a lot about that. That's not how mine works. I think as an empath, it's something that I've always been afraid of, yeah. And I won't say that that's not how it works, because as a hairdresser, like, I touch people all the time. You know, I think I was very afraid to go online, and I'm grateful for COVID, because that's been a test of what the abilities can do, right, without that physical touch. Right, so that's been an evolution in those abilities, right? Pyrokinesis, the ability to set fire. I've had clients, right? Pyromaniac stuff, they're all like blowing fire, right? Like, and I've had clients who are angry and, you know, could start flame. So, you know, that is definitely, it's rare, but it is there, right? Now, remote viewing, these people are adept at, right? So that means being able to, as a kid, sit in their bed at night and be scanning the house for where everyone else was, right?
Yeah.
Or being able to be on the school bus home and scan the house to see what was going to be, what they were going to be entering, right? They're very adept at that, right? Now, remote viewing is different than travel. Remote viewing, you do not have to leave your body, right? So when I'm jumping somebody, I don't travel with them unless they're so frozen in fear that they can't go. I'm using my remote viewing skills in that space to be able to look and watch and experience and still be here in my body in more of a conscious place of authority, right? So, you know, you'll be able to tell how that works for you, right? Even when I do decide to go with someone, it's usually just to get the ball rolling, and then I back out and move into viewing.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Because I want them to feel empowered that they did that, right? So if I jump with somebody, I'm still not going to open the door. I'm not going to interfere physically in any shape or form. Very rarely. Like, I can't think of an example right now where I would.
I think that's what I was afraid of, that's what I was afraid of, is like, going on a jump, getting into the jump. I guess I wasn't clear about how that was. And again, it comes back to the word parameters.
Yeah, you're a guide, right? This is their journey. This is their timeline. This is their time loops. This is their game, right? So you are a teacher and a guide. I tell people, I hate it, but I have a flashlight and I'm going to guide you out of here, but you have to do it, right? It's not real if you do. I had experiences with this one healer, and truly, she was probably one of the most gifted psychics and medical intuitives I've ever been around. But she was always trying to do things for me. And it was very disappointing to me, because that can't be done. Right? I can't put you back in your astral body. Your astral body has a mind of its own. If it doesn't fucking want to go in, it's not going to go in. You know what I'm saying? So us guiding and making relationship and teaching is different than doing. Bless her heart. Every time I would go in, she was going to put me back in my body. And then, you know, there became a level of distrust because nothing was changing for me.
Yeah.
Right. And I was feeling very badly about myself. Right. Because nothing was changing.
Yeah, you can't want something more than what the client wants. Like
Well,
you'd
but
be
like
so crazy.
it's almost like, okay, well, if I'm going to tell you that, okay, you need to change your behaviors, blah, 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 I can't change them for you. You can't put somebody in their body. Like they
Yeah.
have to learn how to do it. They have to learn how to control that and be an authority of that for themselves. Right. So, and I find it's very empowering because it's their superpowers. Right? If you're going in to quote fix it for them, it's a problem. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We only fix problems. It's not a problem. It's a learning. Now we have to recognize that, you know, right now we've got the psychic abilities, we've got mental illness, and we've got the high level of sensitivity all layering in on top of each other for these children who are in environments where nobody's paying attention. Right? Bad things are happening, compiled one after the other all the time. And while these things are saving them sometimes, they're also recognizing that they quote, like the word crazy shows up so often in people's vocabulary when they come in, right? Because they don't know what's real and what's not real. They don't know what's 3D. Like I can say from my experience, like by the time I was 20, nothing felt real, right? Because I could interact with a coffee cup here. I could interact with a coffee cup there. Like my panther was sitting in the room with me half the time. You know what I mean? Like nobody could see him, but I could see, you know what I'm saying? Like by the time without any tutelage and with all this like constant movement of their foundational environment, right? There comes a point where you don't know it's real. You just don't know it's real, right? And you don't know what other people are seeing, right? So you start to doubt your perception of everything, right? So many of these people, that perception of doubt, right? This is a huge crux of that. Okay? So again, you know, moving and working to empower them and to support their brilliance is different than pointing them to the problems, right? They're going to come in with enough problems of their own, right? So, you know, just like the woman who was driving down to meet her lover and her body was in such repulsion. Right? Her body was in absolute repulsion. Her energies were, and you know, the story became, you know, this whole giant story about what he did and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, rather than just resting in, you know, that was not in my highest and best, that choice. Right? I was making a human choice, not a choice out of unity and integrity. Right? Because as she was talking, I was like, honey, well, you have to understand you are going there to end your relationship and have one more sexual experience with him. And in his mind, you know, he was receiving you and opening the door to introducing you to his friends and stuff because he was thinking more long term. Like that, him introducing him you to his friends was not an affront to you. There's nothing to blame, but it was definitely a conflict of interest. And the situation wasn't in integrity. Yeah. So as we're moving through this, like if fear's present and they're not being chased by a tiger and nobody's beating them and nobody's like, you know, taking away their home or blah, 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 fear response is not appropriate. Right? So we're always trying to break that down. Like, what does that really mean? What are you afraid of? Right? Well, I'm afraid that this person isn't going to like me anymore. And I said, okay. So you're distrustful of the person and their intent, or you're distrustful of how you showed up. Right? That's different than being afraid. Let's leave afraid with the tigers and lions and bears. Right? Or somebody that has a gun or a knife. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, you know, we're going to start reframing these experiences with growth words, right? So we're always looking for words that can point up rather than down, right? It's like if these folks were a tree, you know, and somebody stepped on it, right? It might be leaning again, but it's going to search for the sunshine, right? Somebody steps on it again, it's going to be leaning but looking for the sunshine, right? You know, so we want to pull all that up to where it's all the words, everything is pointing forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And we're guiding them through separating out how they are accessing their information. What channels is it coming through, right? What is their interpretation of that? You know, often like because they're so caught in worry in the daytime, spirit begins talking to them through their dreams in the beginning here. And, you know, as they bring a dream forward, I've experienced spirit to be very simple, very childlike, and, you know, pictures are very direct. And, you know, the person is creating this whole story with all this, right? When, you know, it's pretty direct and straightforward. And this is usually scary. Right? And this is like, okay. Right? Does that make sense? So
Yep.
you know, this woman was like, I'm on a boat and the boat's sinking and people are jumping off. And it seems that there's only so many rowboats. And I said, well, did you get a rowboat? And she said, yeah, I did. But then I felt bad for everyone else. And I said, well, you do understand, right, that a big boat like that would probably be the growth and movement of your life and, you know, your family members, right? Water is often emotion, right? Some people that you know are probably drowning in emotion, right? Some people, maybe that boat is sinking and you're needing to realize that, you know, what was isn't serving and you're rising out of emotion. That's a different interpretation of that. You know what I mean? Than drowning. You know, so we're always working to find action and awareness to replace reaction. And we're looking to help them exercise their abilities in ways, right, that will help with their reorganization. So these abilities, like them being able to master quantum jumping and astral travel and spatial clairvoyance and, you know, keeping people out of their heads, right? Because often an empath will be with a mind bender.
A mind bender?
I call them mind benders. Mind benders are those that can get inside your head,
Yeah.
right? Like narcissists, right? So you'll see a lot of empaths with narcissists because, you know, so being able to keep somebody out of your head is a step that, you know, certain people we work on. I'll be like, keep me out. Keep me out of your head today.
Yeah.
See if you can feel me trying to get in. You know? See if you can feel me trying to access your pictures.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we play with it, you know, because that's legit. Right?
That was my former husband and me.
Yeah. Now I can recognize that. Yeah. So this is a phrase I use all the time. Right? Could it be possible? Right? Because, you know, when I wrote Junebug, my first book, and the editor sent it back, saying it didn't make sense that the timeline was off, I thought I was going to literally have a nervous breakdown. Like, I can't even describe what that felt like, right? To be questioned around my timeline, right? So I'm very careful when we're inserting new thoughts and questioning what they believe to be true with could it be possible? So, hey, like, you know, I'm just wondering, could it be possible that, you know, your dad's intention could have been this, that, or the other, and, you know, you were absorbing your mom's interpretation of that? Could that be possible? Right? Because that didn't really happen to you. It happened to your mom. Or could it be possible that, you know, your dad had been trying to see you and your mom was prohibiting that or making that very difficult in some way? Could that be possible? Right? Because often the anger is pointed at the wrong people too. Right? You know, they're going to be angry at dad for not coming to see him when what's real and true is mom is doing everything in her power and using the child to hurt dad.
Yeah.
Right? And the child is angry at dad. And he can't fix that because he didn't do it. It wasn't his to do. Right? So often when I'm questioning like how the story is going together, this is the way I introduce it. Right? Could it be possible? And, you know, sometimes I'll be like, no. Right? And I'll be like, okay. And maybe a week later, I'll be like, could it be possible? And it's like they've heard it for the very first time.
Yeah.
Right? So often I'm just reinserting until the readiness is there to explore. Right? You know, you met Paula in the videos. Like I said, probably the second time I met her, she said out loud to me, right? She was in the middle of this big story. It was almost like if somebody were coming out of a coma and said something and was instantly asleep again. That's what the experience was like for me on the other end. And she'd just be talking and rattling away. And then it'd be like, I think dad or Papa molested me, blah, blah, blah. Right. Like picking up with the word from the story. You know what I mean? As if she were reading. And she probably did that for 6 months before there was any sort of recognition or ability to explore that. You know, because that was such an inward fight with her because she loved him. She just didn't like that, you know. So being able to reconcile that, you know, so I was the same way with my father, right? Like in that, like, now the psychic or the healer wasn't as adept and was not trauma informed, right? That's why I feel like this is so powerful. But I went in, and she definitely had awareness around my dad molesting me, and she just thought I knew it. Right. So when I walked in, you know, and I'm like, I feel like my dad molested me, she was like, oh, well, yeah, you didn't know that. Right. Which was a complete affront. I also had, you know, another psychic tell me that he didn't do that. Right. That he did not do that, that it was all just energetic, and it was in my, it was, you know, faulty information. And what's real and true is he admitted that he did it, but that had me really messed up for a long time. Right? That one psychic said yes and one psychic said no. Right? So we have to understand that inserting information like that, because I did not ask the second psychic that piece of information. Right? She just volunteered it. Right? So you being in integrity, and if your body doesn't feel, I guess here's how I am with it. If information is coming through me, or like I'm saying something, if my body has any sort of response to it, I'm gonna reevaluate. Because if my body is emotionally involved in it in any way, it's not an intent. Right?
That's very interesting. So we're tuning into the body to get the to see what emotional response there is to that particular situation all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Gotcha.
And that, you know, if my body is feeling emotion, right? Now, at this point, I'm adept enough to know whether it's mine or not, right? Because I'm very clear what I feel like. But if the practitioner or the psychic is emotionally involved in that, there is a very huge likelihood that they are projecting their own stories over. Because when in my work, I very rarely feel anything. Right? I'll mirror, I'll reflect, I'll notice, but like I'm not having emotion. Like if somebody comes in complete crisis and is talking about suicide, if I get emotional, they're screwed. Right? If I get afraid, then they're going, because I remember, you know, as I was coming through that, if I would see shock or fear on my psychologist's face, I would be devastated and get up and leave and never come back. So I was like, how can you help me? Right? How can you help me if you're feeling horrified by my experience, right? So we have to be aware of that, you know. And I find that, you know, staying in our lane, right? Staying in our bodies and focusing on mirroring and recognizing rather than internalizing, we can do that. Because if spirit is using you, they don't want you to be emotional.
Yeah.